Hello and welcome to Web Hack Wednesday. I'm Martin Beebe.
And I'm Martin Kern.
And today we are looking again at recommendations, something which we've looked at before, but now
we like to revisit old ground, but there's a reason for that.
Yep.
When we looked at this before, I believe it was in Series 2 that we looked at this before.
Yep.
We had our little hotel concierge, if you remember.
I do remember, Jack.
Highly amusing. That was the Cognitive Services Recommendations API.
Yep.
Now, that API, as we know it, is being deprecated in February 2018. And in its place, we have something called the Cortana Intelligence Suite Recommendation Solution Template.
Oh, get lost.
No,
really?
That's really what it's called. That really is what it's called.
Cortana Intelligence Suite Recommendations Template.
Exactly. So Cortana Intelligence Suite is a set of kind of templated Azure solutions that you can deploy into your own Azure subscription, basically. Okay. So various building blocks that get deployed onto your subscription rather than compared to the cognitive service where it's just an API you just use. You just get an endpoint and API key.
Okay.
What we do now, we deploy it into your own subscription, so you get to deploy some web apps, some functions, some storage containers, that kind of thing.
Oh, right. So it ends up being functions.
It's all sorts of things, yeah. It's a whole load of different building blocks in Azure that make up what's basically the same functionality as what was in the Cognitive Services API.
Right.
So I thought we'd look at that. So the capability is basically the same, but the way you get to it is quite different now.
Does it mean that you can configure it a little bit more?
Yeah, you got a bit more control. So things like one of the complaints with the Cognitive Service was that it was only in certain regions.
Yeah.
And training, you couldn't really control training time. So if you have very big models, it would take a long time to train.
Yeah.
Now, because it's in your own Azure subscription, you deploy it wherever you want. You can put as much CPU and resource onto that as you want to. You can control domain names. You can do all sorts of things. You can modify it, customize it.
I guess it's because it's web apps and you can scale up, scale down, and things.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right,
so much more control over what's going on with the actual service. It's not kind of a black box like it used to be.
All right. Okay.
It works off an Azure storage container, so you can obviously deploy things that much easier than you used to be able to do. So it's a good move. The functionality is not quite equivalent just yet, but I believe it will be. Yeah. Certainly the basic functionality is there now.
Because I remember when you did the recommendations API before, as I recall it, we had you were doing command line stuff. You'd upload two CSV files. Yeah, a lot of that's kind of the same. So I'll go through that as we go through. So this is so right now, if you go onto the web right now and you search for Azure recommendations, you will still arrive at the Cognitive Services API. That is still there for now. It's still active. It's still available to use. I believe it's going to get switched off in February 2018. Okay. So if we go to this URL, so it's gallery, basically go to Cortana Intelligence Gallery and search for recommendations, and this is where you'll end up. Okay.
This is basically an article that describes the solution, describes what it can do. We have a high-level architecture in here as well, and we have this kind of cool little button called deploy.
Right.
If we go to this, you end up in this kind of, I just need to sign in. So I'm just going to sign into my Azure subscription. So remember, you're deploying this to your own Azure subscription here. This is slightly different to Cognitive Services.
Is this what they sometimes call an ARM template?
It may be.
Yeah.
It possibly is.
Yes, I think it probably is.
We know a man that will answer that question, a guy called Marcus. So just tweet Marcus. I forget what his Twitter is. He'll know. He'll be able to answer that.
Look, I'll say it definitely.
It probably is. Don't say definitely, because
that is definitely an ARM template, and if it's not, I'll edit this bit out.
Okay, fine, good. So let's give this a name. So I've got some. We're going to build up a web application here based on some sports data. So we've done some work with JD Sports recently.
Yep.
Big UK sports fashion retailer.
Yep.
To help them look at this solution for their own web applications.
My ex-girlfriend used to work at JD Sports.
Oh, well, there we go. So that's
family
nice.
Connection.
There we go. We like to keep it in the family. And they were kind enough to let us use their catalogue of data for sort of experiments and things like that. So I'm just going to call this sports site. Deployment name must be between 3 and 9 characters. Okay. Sports site. Is that okay? No. Sports sit. We're going to call it sports sit.
Deployment name must be between 3 and 9 characters, start with a lowercase letter and contain only lowercase letters and numbers.
Yes. Yeah. I hate this stuff.
I know. It's ridiculous.
Anyway, there we go. It is what it is. So let's deploy this to the UK because we can. I'm going to leave the description out. So this is basically just a wizard. It's going to take us through various options here. One of the tips that I found out when we do this, and I'll mention this again when we get to the right stage, is that you need to assign quite a large VM to it. So you'll get a choice in a minute. I'm just going to click next through this. Oh, here we go. So we need to because the actual process of doing the machine learning part of it is quite a CPU intensive task. So if you've got a large catalog on a very small VM, it's going to fail basically. The machine runs out of memory. It's kind of a known problem. So I would recommend at least S2, if not higher, and that's why it defaults to S2 for this. If you've only got a tiny bit of data, it doesn't maybe matter so much, but I know that we've got a lot of data for this catalog that we're going to work on here. I'm going to leave all of that as it is. That's fine. I'm going to do West Europe for that because that's our closest one here. Not that it matters too much for what we're doing here. So that's going to go in provision. It takes about 3 minutes to go in provision. But what this is basically doing is it's deploying a bunch of stuff into Azure. So it's deploying an app service to host the API itself. Another app service to host things like the documentation and the Swagger UI and the recommendations UI where you can configure things. So it's basically an admin interface. It's deploying some Azure functions, some Azure storage, some web jobs, just a bunch of stuff based on a pre-configured set of software into my own personal.
This gets around one of the problems which we had before with this service is the recommendations data is generally private. And this helps you with privacy aspects of it because you know it's in your data center or in your account and so forth. It's not, in some East US.
Yeah, exactly. So I've deployed this to the UK. So I don't have sensitive data with this data, but if I did, it's staying within UK. So data sovereignty is a key thing. I wouldn't have been able to do that with the cognitive one because that's not available in the UK. As a data center. Okay, so that deployment's now finished. Now this is a really important stage because this has given me some really important information. Which
next steps? Congratulations!
Congratulations! You have deployed your Cortana Intelligent Solutions Gallery recommendations template thing.
Wow!
But the thing is, you need to copy this information somewhere. So what I tend to do is just literally copy this stuff and put it somewhere safe. For me, right now, that's going to be Word, but for you, that could be somewhere different. But the API key, the endpoint, you're going to need all this stuff as we work through the rest
I do think that is probably the most secure place to put security endpoint details for a live service, probably in Word.
I think so. Yeah. I don't see any...
I think that they possibly print it out and put it on your cubicle.
Yeah, scatter it around the office. I'm very liberal and carefree with my API keys. You'll notice this, and regular viewers will know this. And if somebody wants to copy that API key, they can go ahead. You can. I'm even going to zoom in and so that you can see it. It's fine.
You're going to regret that.
Yeah. I'll just change it.
Well, actually, you won't regret it because I haven't even switched your screen. So there we go.
Okay, right. Okay, very good. So anyway, so I've kept that information. So important that you save that because you'll need the key. You'll need all these bits as we work through the rest of the thing. So that's now basically deployed. We have an endpoint. This is my endpoint. We have a recommendations UI. This is all in my own Azure subscription. We have a Swagger UI that I can get to look at what's going on with the API.
Swagger's the thing which describes the API, right?
Yeah.
So you could put that into Microsoft Flow or Logic apps.
Yep.
They ingest Swagger.
They do ingest Swagger.
And then you can use it as like an endpoint inside of a Logic app or a Flow app.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Pretty cool, yeah. So before we dive into the next steps, I just want to show you the data that we've got ready to actually train on. So as I say, this has come from JD Sports. We've got their catalogue, which has about 65,000 items in it. So you can see the kind of data that we have here. They sell trainers and football tops, that kind of thing. So we've got an item ID, a name, a title, a category, so trainers, hoodies, socks, etc. This one, I believe, is like a description. They have an RRP price and sell price.
Look at the value you're getting here.
Yeah, I know.
Because they are selling much cheaper than their recommended retail price.
There we go. They have, and then these fields here are what we call feature data. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that. This is basically optional data that helps recommendations draw matches where there isn't any actual usage data. So if somebody's looking at a black pair of Adidas trainers at a price at about £40, even if nobody's ever bought those trainers before, the service can find other black Adidas trainers priced around £40 because it's got this feature data.
So this brand stuff and RRP, Are they? They're just arbitrary values. They can be anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything you want.
So these are JT Sports Zone values. Anything that's got an equal sign with it, basically. Right. The stuff without an equal sign is mandatory data that you have to include.
Okay, and the mandatory does it matter the order that they're in? Because it's a CSV file, right?
Yeah.
So because I remember this from the old recommendation stuff. It had to be in position 1, position
absolutely.
2.
It's still the same. The format's exactly the same, actually. So if you look on the,
but they didn't have this metadata concept,
they did have this before. Yeah,
didn't get that far.
Yeah,
then. Right.
You obviously weren't paying attention.
No, not really. I did like the basic demo of that.
Yeah.
So.
If you look on the GitHub repo that we've got for this episode, there's a link to the schema file. There's a link to all the stuff we're talking about, so you can see the exact schema.
Okay, so that is just here.
Yeah.
Just here.
Yeah. Very good. So we've got various bits of metadata. We've got product image, and we've got a colour and those kinds of things as well. So that's what we call the catalogue.
Yeah.
The other piece of data that's important for this is what we call usage data. Now this is a mapping between a user ID and an item in the catalogue.
Okay.
Now in this particular case, these mappings are purchases. So this is where users have purchased items. Right. But the actual API supports much more than that. It supports lots of different interactions which have different weightings. A purchase is classed as like a weighting of 4, so it's the strongest type of recommendation you can have. But if somebody even views a page, that can potentially be added to this data set.
Okay.
And you're aiming for every single item in the catalogue, you're aiming for about 20 usage events.
Right, okay.
So by order of magnitude, it should be about 20 times more rows than what you've got in your catalogue.
Okay.
Now, this particular data set, we don't have that. We have about 700,000 rows of usage, and we have about 65,000 items.
Okay, so it's not far off, but it's
about
not
half, yeah. So the recommendations aren't perfect. They're not what we'd like to see. But anyway, it's what we've got. So those are the 2 data files. Now our next step is to basically upload those data files to our storage account, which has been created for us. So I've called this Sports Sit. If I go to the Azure Explorer and look at my Azure subscription, I'm going to storage accounts. Hopefully somewhere in here, there it is. It's been created for me, Sports Sit. If I expand this out, I've got some blob containers, and under there I've got a container called models.
Yep.
This is where I need to upload those 2 files. So again, before with Cognitive, this would be just a black box. You wouldn't really know where they're going. I know this is going to an Azure storage container in the UK that's under my subscription now. So I'm going to upload these files to that location.
Are there functions listening to this storage?
Yes.
Is that how it works?
Yeah. Web jobs, actually.
Oh, okay.
So not actually functions, strangely. I'm not quite sure why that is, but...
Probably just maturity.
Kind of, yeah.
Functions actually are web jobs.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. I think.
Yeah. Under the hood, they're actually run on the...
Same thing, yeah. So let's upload those files. They're quite big files, so about 30 odd meg, because there's quite a lot of data there, of course. But yeah, at the moment it does have to be a CSV file in that specific format in order to work. Hopefully going forward that might not be the case, but that's what it is at the moment. So those are there. The next thing we need to do is train the model. Okay, so if we go back to our little helpful page here, we've got this thing called a recommendations UI.
Okay.
Now before I go there, I'm just going to copy this API key, because I'll need that in a second. Now again, this is my specific recommendations UI. This is being run out of my Azure subscription. I'm going to pop the API key in there. And then I'm going to train a new model. There is an API to do all of this stuff if you wanted to as well. Now, this is the name of the container where you stored your training data. So that's called models. The file relative to the path, this will be, this is the usage folder. So this is my name of my usage file, which is this. So I'm just going to cheat by doing this. And then the catalog one as well. So this is my catalog. I spelt it incorrectly as far as Americans are concerned, but it is the correct spelling in this country, so that's what we're going to stick with. And there's loads of other settings that affect the quality of the recommendations, the thresholds of various things. I'm going to broadly leave these as they are. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable cold placement. Cold placement is where if the usage doesn't have recommendations, so if somebody hasn't bought that particular item, that's classed as a cold item. It's not been used effectively. What cold placement does is it will flail back to using that feature data in the catalogue to make recommendations.
Right,
so it's kind of a bit more primitive than usage data, but it means that you will always get recommendations. They won't be as good quality, but they're better than nothing. And you can also have cold to cold recommendations. So you can have an item that hasn't been bought recommending another item that hasn't been bought. So I'm going to turn all of that on. User to item recommendations. This is where you can have a user ID having recommendations based on their own personal purchase history. So I'm going to turn that on as well. Seed items in recommendations. I'm going to leave that off because I don't want it recommending the thing that I'm seeding the recommendations on. And I'm going to enable backfilling as well. So we click train. This will take about sort of 7 minutes or so to train with this data. Obviously the training takes as long as the data that you have for. Right. So we'll just use video editing technology to come back in 7 minutes time. We're back.
Yes.
7 minutes has passed, approximately a bit longer than that actually.
Yeah, fair enough.
Should we do a little no, we need to go up because we
back.
No, you need to go the sound up. Okay, back in the room. Okay. That was worthwhile, wasn't
it? Yeah.
So here we go. So we've finished. Do you want to flip over to the screen? The model's been trained. We see lots of data here about how many items got looked at and all that kind of stuff. But basically, it's trained. We've now got a trained model. Now to test this out, I'm going to go over to Postman. Postman is my favourite API testing tool. And I've just kind of preset this up. So I've taken the API endpoint, passed in an item ID that I'm looking for. So I've just picked an item that I know has got some recommendations. I'm asking for 5 recommendations. Then I've added in the API key as well.
Okay, there's an XAPI
XAPI key, yeah, as a header. Yeah. Very, very simple. It's just like every other API, and the docs are really good for this as well. So I just send that. There we go. Those are the results. So it's going to give me a set of item IDs which map to items in my catalogue, and it's also going to give me a recommendation score. Now these recommendations are quite low, but don't worry too much about that. The score, obviously, the higher the score, the stronger the recommendation.
Okay.
Now just to finish this off, if you look at the GitHub repo, there's a very, very simple example of this, like really, really lightweight example of how to build this in ASP.NET. But what I want to show, rather than going through that, is show a slightly more advanced sample that we've built based on the actual JD Sports data and some of the things we've done with it. So this is a sportswear shop. This is a separate GitHub repo which is linked to from the episode 1, and you can just kind of browse through this. It's not the best e-commerce website in the world, but you can look at an item. You can see that it's bringing recommendations.
Okay.
So basically, what's happening? It's sending this item ID. This one is 78246 over to the API. It's getting recommendations back, and we've done some filtering and stuff like that with that. So let's just look at the item that we just tried in Postman. It's a Nike Holland children's football kit from 2014.
Yeah, popular item.
Very popular. So we've got a few things here. So what we're doing is we're basically getting 100 recommendations for this, and we're filtering it on making up an outfit using a top.
That is one.
I mean, that's a cool outfit. I mean, we're doing recommendations. So other football kits from Holland, trainers that have got the same kind of colours in them, even accessories, so football boots that people have bought with that particular kit. So it's pretty cool. We can add to cart. We've made a kind of little sample cart here. And now it's doing recommendations across the entire cart as well.
Right, so you're passing in more than one ID?
Yeah, so let's just pass something. If I pass that one in as well, it's going to do recommendations across the entire cart of items.
And that is bringing up some rather nifty orange flavour.
So it's taking a combination of a green trainer and an orange football kit, and it's coming back with a red.
Oh,
trainer.
Is that red?
Yeah, well, it's dragon.
Slightly orange.
Technically.
Yeah, well, dragon would be... so I'm colourblind, so I can't really tell you.
So
I don't know why I'm arguing.
No.
That's red.
Yeah, it kind of is red. Yeah. What I've just glossed over a feature. If I just remove that trainer there, one of the things that we've done here is we've got an upsell feature here around shipping thresholds. So have a £60 shipping threshold. If you spend £60, you get free shipping.
Right.
So we're able to recommend things. So this top is £15. I know this is shown in dollars, but don't worry about that. We're recommending things that are around about £45 to fill the basket up to that threshold. So that we can do some quite cool things. It's all using that basic recommendation. So I can say, well, that's £45, so I'm going to add that to my cart, and now I've got free shipping.
Okay, cool.
Oops. The other thing I can do is I can actually log in as a user. So this isn't real authentication. This is just to demonstrate the recommendation.
It never is with you, Martin. It never is real authentication.
So I've got a user ID there. This is one of the user IDs from that usage.
If that was a real website, like just cut and paste the user ID.
Copy and paste. So this particular person has clearly bought some blue children's Nike stuff before, so these are the recommendations for that individual user rather than based on item. It's based on user and their
users the recommendations based upon that user's purchase history.
Exactly, yeah. So they've clearly bought things in the past that are blue Nike for children.
Right,
and that's so it's therefore recommending more things. And these are quite strong recommendations. You can see 27%, 7%. They're obviously based on actual usage history.
Based upon some of the settings that you made, it won't be recommending things that they've actually bought though before, because
they've actually made the purchase. So one of the settings we did when we trained the model is to include seed items, and we set that to false.
So when the items that you've passed over to the API, like the 6 or 7 items that this person's bought,
won't be included
in the results, which is quite good for an e-commerce because you don't want them buying the same thing necessarily.
You don't want to recommend the same thing. No.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's it basically. So the functionality is very much the same as it was before with Cognitive, but the way you deploy it's very different. You've got a bit more control now. It's in your own Azure subscription, and hopefully the capability will get built on as we go forward here. But this is kind of new now, so ready to start exploring and playing with.
Okay, well that's it for this week. We recommend that you go try this. I know, I've been practicing that.
You've been waiting to say that for about 20 minutes, haven't you?
Recommend you try this API. We are going to be back next week.